In this video, we're going to be discussing tips and tools for how to install recessed lights. And I've got a special bonus tip that you may not have seen before if you stay till the end of the video. Stay tuned, it's all coming up next. What's going on, folks? Kendall here with Renos Pros and Joes, back with another renovation and remodeling how-to. This is the first video in the How to Install Recessed Lighting series. In this video, we're going to be sharing some helpful tips for planning out and executing your recessed lighting project, as well as a list of tools that you will need for this type of project. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because we're going to be sharing tons of helpful information in this video and in this series. So I'm standing here in the dining room today, and this is going to be the room where we're actually going to be working. And this room has one lighting source in it besides natural light, and that is this chandelier here to my right. And during the daytime, this room gets tons of natural light when the drapes are open, but when the drapes are closed and the natural light is no longer a factor, you're able to quickly see that this room suffers from a lack of sufficient lighting. So I'm going to take a quick moment and show you what this looks like. I'm going to close these drapes, and then I'm going to step back in front of the camera and you'll be able to see the huge difference. I'm going to turn this light on first, then I'll do the drapes. I'm back. Notice anything different? Without the natural light in the equation, you can see that this light is not putting off very much light. So imagine that you were in this space trying to do homework or working on a project or even just working on a computer or even eating dinner. There's not a whole lot of light in this space. And so that's the main reason why we're going to be upgrading this lighting situation in this room with recessed lights. And so join me on this project. And I'm going to open these drapes back up. We're going to get all of this furniture out of here, and then we're going to jump into those tools that you're going to need for this type of project, as well as some very helpful tips for laying out and executing this type of project. So go ahead and hit that like button and leave a comment in the comment section below. We're going to have fun on this one. Okay, so a few housekeeping things before we get started. If you're in an older home, you do need to be concerned with the potential for the existence of lead-based paint and asbestos. And even if you're not in an older home, you also need to be concerned with the potential for the existence or creation of silica dust. I will have links to more information of all three of these concerns in the description box below. So we're going to go ahead and get started off with the tools. Now, the first tool that you may realize that you already need is going to be a hole saw. But one thing that people often don't realize about hole saws is that once you get up to a certain size, they're no longer sold in kits typically, and you've got to actually buy the hole saw size that you need specifically for your job. And right here, I've got a great example of that. This is a 6-inch hole saw, which would be the size that you would typically use for cutting 6-inch recessed light holes. Before we go any further, I'll have links to all the tools that we're going to be talking about in this video in the description box below. So this is a 6-inch hole saw here, you can see, and this one's used, but it still works great. But what I want to show you is that this is actually consists of two pieces. And so if I pull this apart, you can see that it's two separate pieces. So this piece here that I'm holding up, pretty heavyweight stuff here, this is the 6-inch hole saw, okay? But this will not work and cannot be attached to your drill or impact driver or whatever you're going to be using. You cannot attach it without one of these. So this is your mandrel, and this is the pilot bit here that gets you started in your hole. So you need both of these to be able to cut holes with your drill or impact driver. One alone will not do. So we've got both of those. Which brings me to the next point, is that you're going to need a good drill. You're going to use a drill that's going to have variable speed on it so that you can turn the speed down so that you can be better able to manage the torque on the drill. When you get up to hole saws of this size, the drill can be very unruly when you're trying to guide it and keep it in the hole. And if you've got a drill that does not have variable speed that you can turn down, the drill can easily kick and jerk, and you can cut yourself very easily if you do that. And of course, you don't want this drill to fall out of your hands because all your work is going on overhead and you don't want to drop anything on yourself unexpectedly. Now, the next thing that you're going to want to use when you're doing a project like this is going to be some type of wire cutters or wire strippers like these. And this is just a basic set right here. This is what you're going to use to be able to peel off the plastic off of your wiring that you're going to be preparing to attach to all of your recessed lights. The next thing that you want to have is going to be a good step ladder. Don't use a chair on this. Go out and buy or borrow or rent a step ladder to be able to do this type of work, because you're going to be spending quite a bit of time on the step ladder, and you want to make sure that you've got one that's very sturdy, as well as the fact that you want to help prevent yourself from getting fatigued because of the amount of time that you're going to be spending on the ladder. You want to make sure that you've got a good one. The next thing that you want to have with you, now I don't have it here on my table today, is going to be a tape measure. Now you can use a tape measure, or you can use a laser level, or you can use a combination of both of these items to be able to locate and place the different locations of your can lights and your ceiling before you do any type of drilling. You want to go ahead and lay everything out so that you can make sure that everything is right where you want it before you get started with actually cutting into the ceiling. The next thing that you want to have is going to be an extension cord, because you're going to be working with a drill that is not a battery powered tool. You're going to have to plug it in, and you want to have a lot of cord available to you because you're going to be moving around different locations. You want to make sure that you've got enough room on that cord to be able to maneuver without being concerned with it being unplugged. Now, if you've got a strong drill that's variable speed that is battery powered, then kudos to you. This will be an excellent application for that type of tool. Now, the next type of tool that you're going to be concerned with is going to be a voltage tester. You could use just a little stick tester here. Go into my bag here. I've got one here, for example, one just like this. And this is one you're going to use when you're going to be removing your light fixture from the existing box, if you've got one, as well as when you're doing anything with your wiring. Obviously, before you do anything with regards to dealing with light fixtures, you want to make sure that you've turned off the power and the breaker panel. And even though the light may be off, you can also, or you should also, double check to make sure that there's no power on that circuit to make sure that you don't get shocked there. The next thing you want to be concerned with is having somewhere to place all of your tools. And as you see, I've got this nice little portable table that I'm using here today, very lightweight, but will hold a lot of weight on it. We've got all of our things spread out here, which makes it very easy to work. Now, if you're going to be working by yourself, this is going to be more important than if you're going to be working with a second person who's going to provide a second set of hands. But if you're going to be doing all of this activity by yourself, you're going to have to be scooting your ladder all over the place. You're not going to really have enough space on the top of that ladder, even if it's got a little shelf, to be able to hold all of the different tools that you're going to be using as you're going to be going through the process of pulling your wire and making your connections and setting your boxes and everything else like that. So if you got somewhere to rest all of your tools that's not on your client's area or not on your area, then, or floors and things like that, then that's also a good thing. So the next thing you also want to be concerned with is having plastic. Now, I don't have plastic here, but you're going to have a roll of painter's plastic. It's typically what it's referred to. And it's a thin polyethylene sheeting that you can color and take it and drape it over the things in the space that you can't remove. So you can see in this space, we've got a chest over here that's going to have, we're going to have difficulty moving this. We're just going to cover this up and tape it off so we don't get any dust in it. You can see there's another piece of furniture here behind me that's also going to be covered and taped so that it doesn't get any type of dust in that during this process. You can also use that sheathing to be able to cover your floors. However, in most applications, it's going to be better for you to use a drop cloth. And that's another item that you can use, is going to be drop cloth to cover your floors to make sure that you can minimize your cleanup and don't worry about tools and things falling off of your ladder and things like that and dinging the floor if you're in a space that's got hardwood floors or some type of floors that can be easily damaged. The next thing that you want to be concerned with is going to be gloves. Now, you want to probably have two different types of gloves for this one. Now, I've only got one here on my table, but we're going to talk about both. So the first type of glove that you're going to be concerned with is going to be the ones you probably think of, which is going to be like a nice pair of work gloves. I prefer the leather cowhide ones. As I said, I'll have links to all these ones in the description box that I recommend, but if you're going to be crawling around in an attic space or anything like that, You want to make sure that you protect your hands because you're already going to be down there in a less than ideal position, and you're going to be crawling around, so you want to make sure that you don't get splinters and things in your hands as you're crawling on top of ceiling joists and things like that and having to crawl over installation and things like that. It'll make it a lot easier to maneuver up there. Now, the second pair of gloves that you want to use, which is equally as important, is going to be a pair of gloves like these. Now, these are nitrile gloves, but the reason that you want to use gloves like this is that when you're working with your ceilings, the paint on the ceiling is a flat paint and it's white, and it's very unforgiving to things like dust and dirt or even oil. And everyone's hands have oil and grease in them. So just touching the ceiling alone can leave fingerprints and marks that you will have a very difficult time removing. And so if you wear your gloves while you're doing your work up there, you don't have to worry about coming into contact with them with your bare hands, which could leave residue on the ceiling. This is going to be true when you're going to be drilling your holes, and it's also true when you're going to be actually installing the lights themselves. So when you're placing your can lights in the holes and everything like that, you want to make sure you've got on a pair of these and make sure that they're clean. So if you've been working in one pair and they become soiled, go ahead and get rid of those and swap out to a clean pair before you start doing things like putting in your actual fixtures in place. The next thing we want to talk about is going to be your respirator. Now, I've got the full-blown setup here, but you're going to want to use something along these lines. You could use one like this or even an N95 to be able to make sure that you're protected from all the dust and debris that may be falling. This is of more concern when you're going to be working overhead on projects like this because everything has to come down over your face and everything else like that. Another good idea is going to be to have a pair of goggles. This is also going to be for protection of your eyes to keep dust and things from falling on your face. Another thing that you also may want to be concerned with is going to be your hearing. So you can use earplugs or you can use ear muffs to be able to block out the sound of running that drill and hole saw, only a foot or less than 2 feet from your head and your face. That will help cut down on the noise and everything for you. You also want to make sure that you have on a good pair of shoes. And this is going to be important because you're going to be on this ladder for an extended period of time. And so you want to make sure that you've got some closed-toe shoes, so no flip-flops and sandals on this. You want to have a nice pair of work boots or even a nice pair of tennis shoes that are going to be in good shape that you don't mind standing in for an extended period of time, because the type of pressure that you're putting on your feet is very different when you're standing on a ladder than it is when you're standing on level ground. That's another thing to keep in mind. And now one more safety concern that I also want to mention right here with the tools is going to be your equilibrium. And I bring this up because if you're not familiar with working on ladders, then sometimes when you get on a ladder, it's kind of hard to describe, but you may not feel as sure on your feet on one particular day or at one particular moment as you may normally feel. So if you get on a ladder and you feel that way, then you need to postpone or put off doing this type of project or allow somebody else to take care of it for you, because your balance is going to be of the utmost importance when you're doing this, even if you're not very high off the ground. Remember that when you're doing a project like this, you're going to have so many things going on besides maintaining your balance on the ladder that your ability to balance your body weight on the ladder is almost like a given, if that makes sense. So you're not going to have the opportunity to focus heavily on trying to make sure that you don't fall off the ladder, because you're going to be working to mark holes on the ceiling and you're going to be running the drill and you're going to be pulling wire and things like that. So you want to make sure that you're in a good enough condition to be able to do that and maintain your equilibrium and balance yourself on that ladder as you work. So let's move on to the tips for planning. Now, the first tip that I want to bring up, which I often see people mention when they're writing reviews on different types of recessed lighting and hole saws, is that you want to make sure that you use or take your hole saw that you've purchased and check the diameter of that hole saw against the size of your recessed light. And so you want to be able to hold those things up side by side, or use your tape measure and measure from one side to the other and make sure that they're the same size. Sometimes people end up getting hole saw that cuts a hole that is slightly smaller than the size they need for their recessed light, and that can become a huge pain to try to go back and recut it or resize it so that the fixtures that you have fit. Similarly, some people also end up with hole saws that are bigger than the recessed lights that they're using, and then you've got a whole different problem that's going to be substantially harder to fix on that regard as well. So the next thing you want to do is map out how you're going to contain your dust. Now, if you're in a space like this, when you've got everything completely open, you're going to be able to take some time and make sure that you've covered your floors in their entirety. You may even want to take some plastic and cover all of your walls, cover all your drapes and everything, and tape everything off to make sure that you can minimize the amount of cleanup that you have and minimize the spread of dust and debris. Now, if you're going to be in a space like this that you're going to be able to relatively easily contain, you may also want to consider using something like a zip wall or a product that will allow you to completely close off that area from the rest of the property where you're working. And there's also another tool that you may want to consider purchasing. I'm going to see if I can find it. I thought I had it in here with me, but it's important for me to show you. Okay, so with regards to making your plans for how you're going to contain dust, this is one of the tools that you can also use as an attachment on your drill. This goes over your hole saw and basically serves as a bowl to cup and catch a lot of that dust and debris that falls as you're drilling overhead, to make sure that what falls through the ceiling doesn't fall completely on the floor and make a huge mess. So as I said, I'll have links to all the tools in the description box below, including this dust bowl right here. Now, another thing that you also want to keep in mind is how you're going to plan out or minimize the amount of dust and debris that falls through. I personally like to always drill a pilot hole, which is basically going through and drilling a small hole in the center once we've completely finalized where all those holes are going to go. And so there's nothing wrong with using the bit that's here on our mandrel to be able to do that. Once we've finalized all the locations of our can lights, we want to make sure that we've got a point or a mark on all those holes where the specific center of each one is. You can go ahead and pop a hole in there for your pilot hole. Now, another thing that I like to do, and this is where having a hanger comes in handy, or you can use whatever is going to be available to you that will work. But I like to use a coat hanger, and I like to straighten it out, and I like to poke that coat hanger all the way through the hole up into the ceiling. And what that allows me to do is to go into the attic, and I can see that wire poking through, and I can go in and I can move the insulation out of the way so that I'll have less issues with all of the insulation falling through the hole once I've drilled my hole there. This is gonna be a common thing that's gonna occur. If you don't do that, you're gonna drill that hole, and then it's gonna whole big ball of insulation is gonna fall through, or a ton of it's just gonna fall out through the ceiling. And even if you're gonna be using a dust collection bowl like this one, it may not catch all of it, or you're still gonna have to be very careful depending on how well you do it. And a lot of times, even if you catch the insulation in a bowl like this, as soon as you step away, some more is going to fall through as the insulation continues to settle, now that you've created a void in the whole thing. And so it's just easier from a maintenance and ongoing work standpoint to just go ahead and push that insulation back so that you have less likelihood of it falling through initially, as well as less of a likelihood that it continues to fall through as you work before you can go ahead and get your light fixture in there. So the next thing you also want to do before you do any cutting, though, is going to be, if possible, you want to inspect that area in that attic or the area above where you're going to be installing those lights. And the reason why you want to do that is you want to be aware on the front end of any type of obstructions that may exist up there. So you may have a scenario where you've got some type of water pipe running up there, or you may have a gas line that's running up there, or you may have some electrical that's not strapped down to the side of the framing, or you've got some type of low voltage wiring that's just laying right on top of the underside of the drywall or plaster. You want to know about these type of things because you're going to be running a saw up through there, and running that saw through there, when it pops through, that blade is very sharp here and can easily cut, snag, and cut through whatever's up there or damage it to the point where it has to be repaired as part of your project unexpectedly, which is, of course, you want to always avoid that. Which brings me to my next point. When you're going to be using your hole saw and your drill, you want to make sure that you're controlling the drill at all times. And this is one of the reasons why you want to make sure that you're using a variable speed drill that will allow you to turn it slowly. Ideally, you want to use a variable speed drill that has different locking settings on it, as opposed to the type you just pull the trigger down harder to make it go faster, because it's going to be hard to control the speed on a variable speed drill like that. And so if you got your proper drill, you want to make sure that you're controlling the way that you're holding that drill in place. You want to make sure that you're holding it level and true, and you don't want to put unnecessary pressure on that drill. So you don't want to be trying to push the drill or horse the drill through the hole. You want to basically allow the bit to spin and work, and you just kind of hold it in position and make sure that it maintains its contact with the ceiling until it goes all the way through, and then bring it back down in a controlled way. You don't want to be pushing on the thing because you run a lot more risks of tearing something up or damaging your ceiling above. Now, another thing that you also want to be concerned with, this is another way that the tape comes into play, is that you've got a ceiling that's going to be older, particularly if you're going to be cutting into plaster, or you're going to be cutting into a ceiling that has like a popcorn or some type of acoustic finish or texture on it. These type of ceilings all lend themselves or are more frequently known to chip and break as you begin to cut with a hole saw like this. And so one method or technique that you can use to try to minimize the amount of chipping and tearing is to be able to tape a circle around that perimeter of where you know you're going to be cutting your hole. And that tape will help prevent the ripping of the surface material on the ceiling as you begin to cut. Now, you want to use a painter's tape to do this as opposed to like a regular masking tape, because you don't want to have to be concerned with the tape sticking too well when you go to remove it, and you don't want it to leave a bunch of residue up there when you remove it as well. So the next thing that you also want to be concerned with, or the technique that you want to use, this is a bonus tip, by the way, for staying till the end. Let me show you this. I've got to go find one, but when you're trying to lay out your can lights, I've got a secret weapon. Okay, so I've got one bonus tip for those of you all who have stayed to the end. Now you're probably wondering, why is this guy holding up sanding pads? I'll tell you why. These sanding pads are for a 5-inch sander, which is 1 inch smaller than a 6-inch hole saw bit. And I'll show you right here when I hold it up like this. You can see that there is a slight difference there in size between these two, but it's not huge. And what you can do with these is place a roll of tape on the back, tear off a short piece, and roll it over like you're taping on a name tag or something like that, and put that on the back of this disc here. And you can place all of these pads on the ceiling in all the locations where you plan to have can lights. And this makes it very easy to manipulate and play with the spacing for your can lights to make sure that you've got everything laid out exactly the way that you want it, both for your own project or if you're working with a client and you need to get approval for the design layout. This is going to be an excellent way to achieve that. So you can use these sanding discs to make sure that you've got everything located where you want it, which also makes it much easier to pinpoint the location for your pilot holes and everything before you begin to cut. So there's your bonus tip. As I said, this is the first video in this series for how to install recessed lights. Stay tuned because we haven't even gotten started yet. Hopefully you found this video informative. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you all on the next one.